got something fundamentally wrong for 12 years. Not a small thing. Not a side assumption I held loosely and then quietly abandoned. The core of how I understood my work. Something I was trained to believe. Something I applied to other people for more than a decade. Something I applied to myself. And I got it exactly backwards. When I was working in hospice, 12 years as a grief counselor, in the rooms where people spend the last weeks and months of their lives, there was a framework embedded in everything we did. Not written in any textbook I remember. Not named in any supervision session I attended. More like the air in the room. The invisible assumption that structured the entire practice. Processing happens through language. Healing is visible. If you can name what you're feeling, you're moving through it. If you can articulate the shape of your grief or your damage or your recovery to another person, a therapist, a friend, a counselor, that articulation is what makes the healing real. What you can't describe, you haven't worked through yet. And silence, the silence of someone who has stopped talking about what happened to them. Silence means something is stuck. Something needs to be drawn out, carefully, patiently, into the light of language where it can finally be processed. I ran on that assumption for 12 years. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You've been changing for a while now. Not dramatically. There wasn't a single morning you woke up, and everything was different. But over months, something has been shifting. Patterns that used to cost you a great deal don't arrive with the same weight anymore. The reflex to explain yourself to people who've hurt you, to justify, to defend, to make them understand, that reflex has gone somewhere quieter. You notice things differently. You respond to certain situations from a different place than you used to. The ground under you feels more solid. And the strange part is that you can't point to when any of this happened. You didn't have the breakthrough. You didn't reach the turning point you can identify on a calendar. You just noticed, one ordinary day, that something was different. Like you'd been through something and come back changed, and you couldn't say exactly when you left or when you returned. And somewhere underneath all of that, somewhere underneath the quiet, solid relief of it, there's a question that won't quite leave you alone. If nobody's watching this, does it count? If I can't describe it, is it real? If no one around me has noticed, has anything actually changed? I've heard that question so many times, in so many rooms, from so many people who were moving through something real but couldn't find the language for what they were living, and so doubted whether they were living it at all. I gave the wrong answer for a long time. Before I go further, if you're the kind of person who gets caught on a question like that and needs to follow it somewhere real before you can let it go, that's exactly what this channel is for. If this conversation is landing for you, subscribe. That's how you tell the algorithm to send you more of these. I have a lot more that won't leave me alone. I wasn't looking for a challenge to that assumption when I found one. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters. I wasn't trying to revise my understanding of grief counseling. I wasn't examining my professional training. I was reading Jung. Reading him again, more carefully than I had before. Specifically on the subject of individuation. His description of the psyche's drive toward becoming more fully itself. That relentless pull toward completeness that doesn't care about your plans or your timeline or whether you're ready for it. And I kept running into something I hadn't absorbed carefully enough the first time. In Psychology and Religion, the 11th volume of the collected works, published in 1938, Jung wrote, "The growth of personality comes out of the unconscious, which is by definition unlimited." Comes out of the unconscious. I'd read that line before. I'd thought I understood it. But this time I stopped and sat with the verb. Comes out. Emerges. The growth begins somewhere below. Below language, below awareness, below the threshold of what consciousness can observe. And only after it has happened down there does it surface into something that can be pointed at, described, shared. The transformation comes first. The language comes later. Sometimes long later. Sometimes never. That's not a philosophical position. That's a structural description of where the work actually happens. And then I started reading more carefully about the Red Book. The Red Book, Liber Novus, is, among other things, the private record of what Jung called his confrontation with the unconscious. He began it in December of 1913, during the worst period of his inner life. His break with Freud had just become permanent and final. His sense of professional identity was gone. He was having visions. Long, intricate, terrifying visions of catastrophe that he couldn't explain and that preceded the First World War by months. He described himself during this period as disoriented, threatened, as if the ground was becoming liquid beneath him. And into that disorientation, he deliberately descended. He began writing. Not clinical notes, not theoretical papers. He recorded conversations with figures he encountered in the visions. Internal figures, voices, presences with names and faces and distinct personalities that argued with him and questioned him and refused to be dismissed. He recorded all of it in a calligraphied book, illustrated in his own hand, in a style that looks more like an illuminated medieval manuscript than anything that belongs in a psychologist's study. He called this book the Red Book, and he kept it in a safe, not hidden in the sense of not published. I mean physically secured, an actual safe in his house at Küsnacht. He showed it to his wife Emma, to Tony Wolff, to perhaps a handful of trusted people over the decades. He didn't lecture from it. He didn't circulate its contents. He didn't publish it. He kept it from the world for approximately 46 years. From 1913 until he lent it to Agnella Jaffe in the late 1950s for the writing of memories, dreams, reflections. Even after his death in 1961, the book was not published until 2009, 48 years after he died. Let me say what that means. The process that built everything we now call Jungian psychology, the confrontation with the anima, with the shadow, with the self, with the archetypes that have since become part of the language of psychology, was performed entirely without audience. The transformation that made Carl Jung the thinker who would influence 100 years of psychology, literature, religion, and inner work. He did it in silence, in private, with the record locked in a safe. The most important transformation of one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century had no witnesses. I'm going to come back to this. But when I first sat with what that meant, it cracked something open that I hadn't expected. Here's where I need to be honest about what happened next, because the honest version is more useful than the clean one. I immediately started building an exception. The distinction I tried to construct was this. The Red Book was a special case. Jung was a trained analyst confronting the raw material of a new psychology under conditions that required extraordinary privacy. He was developing clinical material. He was working in a domain that had no prior map. The scale of what he was encountering, the intensity, the disorientation, the sheer volume of unconscious content, demanded conditions that ordinary healing doesn't require. Ordinary healing, healing from a damaging relationship, from years of absorbing what everyone around you couldn't carry, from the accumulated cost of being highly attuned in a world that doesn't quite know what to do with that. That kind of healing is relational. That kind of healing needs witnessing. It happens in language, in shared space, in the presence of someone else who can receive and reflect and confirm, yes, what you experienced was real, and the movement you're making is real too. I held that exception for about 3 weeks, and it kept collapsing. I went back to Jung's letters, the Princeton collection, and I found something I couldn't make fit inside the distinction I was trying to maintain. He wrote, "By keeping quiet, repressing nothing, remaining attentive, and by accepting reality, taking things as they are, and not as I wanted them to be, by doing all this, unusual knowledge has come to me, and unusual powers as well." I had to read that twice. He wasn't describing a specialized clinical technique. He wasn't describing the specific conditions required for an extraordinary confrontation with the unconscious. He was describing the mechanism of receptivity itself, the posture that allows what lives in the deeper layers to surface. Keep quiet. Don't repress. Stay attentive. Accept reality as it is, not as you want it to be. The result of that sustained practice, knowledge and capacity, arrived. They came to him. He received them. You don't announce something that's still arriving. You make space for it. But I still had a wall, and I want to describe the wall clearly because I think a lot of people are sitting behind it. There is a real distinction between two kinds of silence. I want to name it because I think the failure to name it is where the confusion lives. The first kind is the silence of shutdown. The ego that has rigidified, closed its doors to what the unconscious is carrying, managed everything by refusing to encounter it. This silence is flat. It doesn't generate. It doesn't produce insight or altered perception or increased capacity to hold contradictions. It produces repetition, the same patterns, the same reactions, the same distance from the same pain, maintained by the same energy expenditure that's been running since the wound was new. Jung saw this clearly. He called avoidance what it is: psychic stagnation. What doesn't encounter its shadow projects it endlessly outward. The wall is real, and it costs exactly as much as you'd expect. The second kind of silence is something else entirely. And I almost convinced myself the distinction was sufficient. I almost said, the first kind is avoidance. The second kind is individuation. And good clinical judgment is what distinguishes them. And that's the answer. I was ready to land there. I was tired, and it was late, and it was a clean enough conclusion. But I couldn't shake something that didn't fit. Because the Jungian indicators of actual individuation in motion, the real markers that the deeper layers are active and working, are entirely interior. They're not visible from the outside. They're verifiable only by the person living them. Reduced projection. What you used to experience as something wrong with other people begins to be recognized as your own material returned. Decreased automatic reactivity, not the absence of emotion, but the arrival of space between what you feel and what you do with it. Increased tolerance for ambiguity, the capacity to hold two contradictory things at once without forcing a resolution the ego can manage. And the deepest one, what Jung called in the 11th collected works, the growth of personality. A felt sense of coherence, of becoming more aligned with what you actually are underneath all the adaptations. None of those things require language. None of them need an audience. They happen in silence, and they're verifiable only from the inside. I almost put this whole inquiry down at that point. Almost. And then, somewhere in the middle of a footnote I almost didn't follow, I came across a name I recognized but hadn't read carefully enough. Marion Woodman. Marion Woodman was a Jungian analyst who worked for decades in Toronto. She trained with analysts who had studied directly with Jung. She spent her career developing what I'd call the embodied dimension of Jungian psychology. Her work on transformation was not primarily about what the mind thinks or understands, but about what happens in the body, in dreams, in the deep somatic interior of experience, where most of the actual work occurs before it ever surfaces into language. I had not read her carefully. I'll say that plainly. She's one of the most significant voices in the Jungian tradition on exactly the territory I was trying to understand. And I came to her late, almost by accident, following a footnote from something else entirely. That's embarrassing. And it's also the honest account. Woodman had observed a pattern across decades of clinical practice. She'd seen it often enough, consistently enough, to name it. And when I found the name, something in the whole inquiry settled. When genuine transformation is happening, the need to broadcast it goes quiet, not as a consequence of the transformation, not as a stage that arrives after the work is done and can be announced at completion. During the process itself, as the transformation is actually occurring, below the threshold of language, in the body, in the nervous system, in the deeper layers where the self operates, the urgency to update people, to post about it, to be seen in the act of changing, that urgency loses its grip. And then she said the other half. The need to declare the transformation is frequently a sign that the transformation hasn't fully arrived yet. What wants to be announced, she described, is still aspirational. The ego narrating a story about who it's becoming. A story that sounds like movement, but is actually substituting for it. The performance of healing filling the space where healing would otherwise occur. The announcement displacing the arrival. When the transformation actually settles, when it has moved through the somatic layers, settled into the nervous system, changed the actual texture of how a person meets the world. It doesn't arrive with urgency. It arrives as a fact, like a door that used to require force is now easy, like a weight you carried so long you'd stopped noticing it until the morning you notice it's gone. That's when it clicked for me. I went back to MDR, memories, dreams, reflections, and to Jung's description of Bollingen, the stone tower he built with his own hands at the edge of Lake Zurich, not a retreat in the metaphorical sense, literally built. Stone, mortar, his hands, across multiple expansions over decades, the place where he went to do what he called his most real work. And I reread what he wrote about it. He wrote, "Words and paper were not real enough. I had to put down a confession in stone." Read that slowly. Not in a letter, not in a published theoretical paper, not in language at all, in stone, built with his hands, in silence, in a place where, as he wrote elsewhere, "Silence surrounds me almost audibly." Almost audibly? The silence wasn't empty. It had a quality. It had a presence. It was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of something else. Something that required that condition to exist. And Woodman's observation and Jung's stone confession are pointing at the same thing. Transformation that happens in the deep interior, in the layers below language, doesn't need to be articulated to be real. It needs to be received, held, given the space to arrive at its own pace. The announcement is what fills the space. The silence is what allows the arrival. Now, let me tell you what I started seeing when I looked at my own hospice work through that lens. There were people I worked with, family members accompanying dying people, people in the middle of the heaviest grief, who processed constantly. Every session, a narrative. I'm at this stage now. I've moved through this. I've been doing a lot of work on myself, and I think I'm beginning to understand what this loss is about. Here is where I am. Here is what I've worked through. Here is the shape of my progress. And some of them genuinely were moving. I want to be precise about this. Language can be the container through which transformation happens. Articulation with a trusted witness can be the mechanism of integration. I'm not dismissing that. Some of those people were processing in real time, and the language was part of how the processing was happening, but some of them were circling. The articulation was substituting for the movement. The map had become the territory. They could describe the journey in increasingly sophisticated terms, and the description itself was giving the ego enough satisfaction to delay the actual encounter. They were, in Woodman's terms, announcing a transformation that hadn't yet arrived. And then there were others. The ones who came in, sat down, were present, said little about their interior, left, came back a week later, sat down, were present, said little. Weeks would pass like that, and then one day, quietly, in passing, they would say something that indicated a shift so complete it had no narrative attached to it. I think I've forgiven him. I think I've stopped waiting for it to feel fair. Something let go. Delivered the way you'd deliver a weather report. Not an announcement. Not the culmination of a therapeutic arc I could describe in my session notes. Just a quiet indication of a fact that had apparently become true at some point when no one was watching. Those were the ones who had actually moved, and I had been trained, from the first day of my certification, to see them as the ones who needed more support. Here's what this understanding cost me to absorb. And I want to say it specifically because I think vagueness here would be a kind of dishonesty. I held a belief about healing that I didn't know I was holding. not as a professional framework I'd examine under supervision, as something more embedded than that. Something that structured how I saw every patient who went quiet, how I understood my own process, how I interpreted silence in other people. The belief was, healing needs a witness to be real. Not necessarily a formal therapeutic witness, not necessarily language in a session, but some form of externalization, some act of naming or sharing or seeing and being seen that confirms, this is real, this happened, this is being recognized. Without that witness, the interior movement is somehow incomplete, or suspect, or hasn't fully arrived. I believed this so thoroughly that I built my professional practice on it, and I believed a quieter version of it about my own life, that the things I'd understood about myself were the things I'd articulated. To therapists, to trusted friends, in writing, in the years I've been doing this work publicly. What could be named was real. What was still silent was still in process. And now I'm sitting with what it means to let that go. Here's the specific thing I can't unsee, and I want to say it precisely because vague versions of this are everywhere, but the precise version is what actually changes something. Right now, at any given moment, there are thousands of people publicly narrating their healing journey. Social media posts about the work they're doing, updates on where they are in the process, articulate descriptions of the stages they've moved through, the insights they've had, the ways they've changed and are continuing to change. Some of that is real. Some of those people are genuinely in motion, and the language is part of how they're in motion. But some of it, and I can't unsee this now, is Woodman's observation in action. The announcement of a transformation that hasn't fully arrived. The ego documenting progress that the self hasn't yet confirmed. The map that exists in language before the territory has actually changed. And more than that, the act of announcing it, the posting, the updating, the narrating, may be filling exactly the space that the transformation would otherwise occupy. Not because intention is wrong, because the ego's need for recognition is strong, and the self's process is quiet. And when the need is louder than the quiet, the need wins. This doesn't make the people wrong. It makes the mechanism real. But here's the part that actually costs me something. I think about specific people I worked with in hospice, not hypothetical patients, people whose faces I remember, who had gone quiet in a way I now recognize, from the inside, as the quietness of something arriving, the stillness of someone who was in the middle of receiving something that didn't have language yet. Not shut down. Present, differently present than the people who were processing verbally. A different quality of attention, a different way of being in the room. And I, trained to believe that visible processing was real processing, nudged them toward articulation. Gently, with good clinical intentions. I tried to draw out the language. I tried to create the space for naming. I tried to make the invisible visible, because that's what I understood my job to be. I don't know what happened in those moments. I'll never know. Maybe some of those conversations were genuinely useful. Maybe the articulation helped something that would otherwise have stalled. But some of them, I think now, sitting with what I understand, some of them might have been an interruption, a well-intentioned hand reaching into a process that didn't need intervention. The silence wasn't a problem to be solved. It was the condition of the work. I got it backwards for 12 years, and now every time I see someone announcing their healing, every time I see the update and the progress report and the public narration of the interior journey, I see something I didn't see before. I see some of it as genuine, and I see some of it as the announcement before the arrival. And I can no longer reliably look at a healing declaration and know with confidence which one I'm seeing. That's what 46 years in a safe actually costs you when you really understand it. Let me come back to where this started. I told you I got something fundamentally wrong for 12 years. That I was trained to see silence as avoidance, as something stuck, as a problem to be carefully and patiently moved toward language. I want to be precise about what I was wrong about and what I wasn't. The silence of shutdown is real. I've seen it. I know what it looks like from the inside and from the outside. The ego that has collapsed inward, the person who has stopped encountering their interior because the encounter stopped feeling survivable, that silence is flat and repetitive. Nothing new enters. Nothing old transforms. The same patterns run and run. Jung named avoidance precisely psychic stagnation. The wall is real, but there is another silence. And there's a woman I worked with in my last year at hospice who I want to tell you about, because she's the person I keep coming back to. She was in her late 70s. She had been estranged from her daughter for more than 20 years. Not dramatic estrangement. The quiet, permanent kind where both people have settled into the shape of the absence and stopped expecting the shape to change. She mentioned it occasionally, briefly, with a kind of matter-of-fact acceptance that told me she had long since stopped hoping the situation was anything other than what it was. For months, when I saw her, the estrangement was just there in the room like a piece of furniture. Part of the landscape of her life. Not raw, not active, just present. One session, maybe 6 months before she died, she came in, sat down and said, "I've let go of it." Just that. No narrative, no sequence of events that led there, no description of the interior work that had preceded it, no therapeutic arc I could have described in my session notes. Just a statement, delivered the way she'd have said, "The view from my window is different today." I asked what had shifted, what had made the change possible, the way I'd been trained to ask. Because if I could identify the mechanism, I could understand the process. I could help her articulate what she'd found so she could hold on to it. She looked at me with a patience I still find humbling 8 years later. "I'm not sure it happened in language," she said. She wasn't evading me. She wasn't deflecting. She wasn't searching for words she hadn't found yet. She was being, I understand this now, in a way I was not capable of receiving at the time, more precise than I was. What had released in her had released somewhere below the level at which I, as a counselor oriented toward verbal processing, could follow it. The transformation had occurred in a place I didn't have clinical access to. Not because she was hiding it, because the process itself doesn't live in language. I thought she was being imprecise. I tried to help her find the words. I think now I was the one being imprecise, and I interrupted something that didn't need my help. So, if nobody's watching, does it count? Here is what I know now that I didn't know 12 years ago. The process that built Jung's entire psychology, the confrontation with the unconscious that became the Red Book, the transformation that became the foundation of analytical psychology, that process happened without witnesses, in a private book, locked in a safe. The result of it has been in print for more than 60 years and has outlived everyone who ever told him it was too strange, too mystical, too outside the acceptable boundaries of science. The transformation didn't need a witness to be real. It needed the conditions in which it could occur, and those conditions, deliberate, sustained, attentive, were silence. Jung wrote about his own practice of keeping quiet, remaining attentive, accepting reality as it is. And he said the result was the arrival of unusual knowledge and unusual powers. He didn't acquire them by effort. They came. He received them. That's the mechanism. You are not doing it wrong because nobody is watching. You may be doing it correctly because nobody is watching. I want to stop here for a second and say something directly. Finding Woodman in the middle of this inquiry, going back through Jung's letters until that line about keeping quiet finally made sense, sitting with the memory of my hospice patient until I understood what she'd been telling me. This took time. Real time. The kind where you follow a thread for hours, not knowing if it's going to lead anywhere. If what I do here has found something in your week that was worth finding. If this kind of exploration matters to you. Super thanks is how you tell me that and make it possible to keep going. I don't say that lightly. These conversations sustain themselves because people find them worth sustaining. If that's you, thank you. Here's what I know now that I didn't before. Not as a theoretical position, as something I've tested against my own history. The things that actually changed me, not changed my mind, not added to my vocabulary for my experience, not helped me articulate something I was already moving toward, but structurally changed me, in the way where the change is visible in retrospect as the difference between who I was and who I am. Those changes didn't arrive in language. They arrived as facts. I'd noticed them after they were already true. A reaction I used to have was gone before I'd decided to let go of it. A pattern I'd been inside of had released before I'd worked through it in any formal way. Something had settled at a depth I couldn't have reached by thinking or talking. I'd find out it had happened by discovering the evidence. A thing that used to cost me something doesn't cost anything anymore. I have a tendency to want to think my way through things, to articulate clarity into existence. It's a useful tendency in some domains and a genuine limitation in others. Jung's work has been, for me, partly a correction of that tendency, a persistent reminder that the psyche does most of its best work below the level I can observe it, and that my job is less to direct the process and more to get out of its way. But I haven't always been good at that. When I test Woodman's observation against my own history, the observation that the need to declare is often the sign that the transformation hasn't arrived yet. I can see it. There are moments I've processed out loud, publicly, with language, where the processing was real. The language was the container through which something moved. I believe that. And there are other moments. Moments I recognize now, looking back, where the announcement was ahead of the arrival, where I told people I'd worked through something before the working through was complete, where the ego's version of progress was more articulate than the self's version of fact. Those announcements didn't lie. They were genuine attempts at something real, but they were reaching forward, narrating a journey that was still happening below the surface. And sometimes, I think this is true, the announcement let off enough pressure that the actual encounter with the material was delayed. The ego found relief in the language before the body found relief in the transformation. The quieter changes held. I want to say something directly to the person who is in the middle of this. If you've been healing in silence for months and the people around you haven't noticed yet, and you're wondering if the absence of announcement is the absence of movement, I want to offer this as a reframe, not a prescription. What if the absence of announcement is exactly what it feels like when the process is actually working? If you've stopped explaining yourself to people who've cost you something, and you're not sure whether that's strength or avoidance, here's the question worth sitting with. What does the silence feel like from the inside? Not how it appears to other people, not what they make of it, but from the inside, in your own body, in your own nervous system. Does it feel like rigidity? Like something locked? Or does it feel like something moving below language, arriving at its own pace, solid in a way that doesn't need anyone else to verify it? You probably already know the difference. If you've felt the pull to tell someone, anyone, that you're healing, and then felt that pull go quiet, and the going quiet felt different from defeat, that's not failure of momentum. That's not backsliding. That might be the moment the arrival actually started. Marion Woodman spent decades working with people in transformation, and the pattern she documented was consistent. Real transformation doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need recognition to proceed. It proceeds in the dark, in silence, in the body, in dreams, in the slowly shifting texture of how a person moves through the world. And when it's complete, when it has settled into the deep layers where change becomes permanent, the need to announce it has already dissolved, because the transformation is so real, it doesn't need confirmation from outside. Jung didn't announce the Red Book. He built it in private, kept it locked for 46 years, let the work it contained change him from the inside across decades. The psychology that came out of that silent process has been changing how the world understands the human interior for more than a century. He confessed in stone, not in speech, because, as he wrote, words and paper were not real enough. Maybe that's what you're doing too. building something in silence that doesn't have language yet. A confession in stone, in the body, in the nervous system, in the slowly solidifying ground of who you're becoming. And when it's ready, when it has truly arrived, the words will come on their own. Or they won't. And it will be real anyway. I want to know how many of us are in this without saying so out loud. If you've been changing quietly, if something has been moving in you without language, without announcement, without anyone around you noticing yet, write in the comments. You don't have to say what it is. Just the quiet kind. That's enough. I'll know what you mean. I think we all will.